Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesday. My name is Fred Bell. We're about 10 days out from filming this with Christmas, and as you can tell, Greg has decided that I needed to be a little more festive. Not to mention that this thing is, I could probably, since we're kind of in this whole lockdown thing, I could probably just wear it as a mask, the way this thing fits. But anyways, welcome to another edition of the program. My name is Fred Bell. I am the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. And today we're going to continue to go down the path of light aircraft. And they all play a role. Every Warbird, you can have a whole bunch of P-51s or P-40s. There are all kinds of airplanes that do their jobs. And today behind me is the Ercoupe from ERCO, Engineering and Research Corporation. That was the company that actually produced these. And before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one off, Greg, because I'm going to suffocate with it if I don't do that. We're tossing it off camera, a high toss by the Bell, and he catches it.
Leaps up, and he got it! Oh my! Are you serious?
One of the exciting things I always get to do is I get to hang out with my somnolent assistant. This is another tough one, Greg. Somnolent assistant, Greg Kenny. Now, the Ercoupe is very interesting, and the reason for that is this is a design from a designer named Fred Wieck. And by the way, I hope I'm not destroying his name. Fred and your family, obviously I'm Greg, partial to Fred, but we are the Fred Society after all. But if I'm destroying his name, I apologize on that. Fred Wieck designed this, and what he was trying to come up with, and the other engineers that worked on this, was to try to come up with something that was essentially an everyman airplane. In other words, it could be flown by just about everybody. It was a practical civil aviation airplane. It did have a military component, though, and that is, again, Warbirds, as I've said before, come in all shapes and sizes. This is about the most compact Warbird you're going to get. So let's get into it, shall we? The Ercoupe was first flown in 1937. As I said, Fred Wieck was the chief designer. Now, Fred is an interesting guy. You should look him up, as all Freds, Greg, are interesting, right? Let's just keep going with that, right? Fred was interesting in that he won the Collier's Award in the late 20s for his design on radial engine cowlings. And remember, we've talked about radial engines before. At that time, in the late 20s, early 30s, they were the most practical aircraft power plants out there. They were still working with like inline, either 6, 8s, or 12s, or V12s, but these radial engines had pretty much kind of moved to the forefront. They were simpler to operate. They had greater tolerances, and he did a lot of work on that. Now, he was also the assistant of aeronautical design at NACA, and I'll let Greg throw that up there in the mid-1930s. Now, at that time, he came up with an idea in that he wanted to build an airplane that could be flown with a limited amount of skill and that could be owned by anybody. And so he, on his own dime, this is outside of NACA, he and some other engineers actually paid for a design called the W1. Now, the W1 was the first attempt at this type of flight control system. It did have a high wing. Greg can get a picture of it. It had a high wing, but the idea was that the airplane flew pretty much like a car. You kind of drove it. You could go up and down, but you drove it around like a car. It had no rudder pedals. And what they were searching for was an airplane that would not stall and would not spin. Now, that is a tall order. We've talked about different airfoils, and NACA went through a whole bunch of different ratings. And some airplanes are extremely unforgiving. Let's say a laminar flow air wing, like with a wing with a P-51, will give you no warning when it falls out of the air. And I've talked to P-51 pilots who flew it during the war, They had a lot of training accidents with laminar airfoil wings in that they would just fall out of the sky. And there are other airplanes that will give you a little bit of a stutter or a bump, and the airplanes will telegraph to you, hey, I'm not really happy with the pitch or the airspeed or where I'm going, but it is extremely dangerous. The other thing is spins. We've talked about spins in this. Any spin in an aircraft is not fun, and you have to have quite a bit of skill to get it out. You have to be trained in order to do that. And if you can take the nasty characteristics out of the airplane, like let's say you just get in your car, for example, Greg, you get in your car, you turn the key on, you press the gas and go. Think about how simple that is as far as the modicum of training it covers. So he was searching for that with the W1 and the W-1, and they paid for it themselves. So they worked on that. He later left the NACA to go to work for ERCO, and that's where they started working on this particular airplane. Now, the prototype for this aircraft was called the 310, and that was really the start of the configuration that you see today. So I have, by the way, a Cessna, another civilian manufacturer who built something for the military. This is a T-37, but I'm just going to use it as an example. But, you know, tandem, so you have tandem seating. They sit side by side. In this case, you have a power plant in there that can get the airplane up. And there were various power plants in this airplane as it moved around. I'm going to talk about production variants. But let's say the top airspeed on the airplane was about 110 miles an hour. Its cruising speed was about somewhere between 75 and 95 miles an hour. And that is how the airplane kind of came together. This split tailplane, remember, it had connected flight controls. And the idea behind the connected flight controls, as I said, was that you could just kind of steer it like you would a car. And that was how the airplane started out. You can hear that? What is that? Wood. Wood and fabric. This is very similar to those early Fairchild or Ryan trainers in that you can hear that change. You got wood and fabric in there. The airplane does have some metal. It's got a cowling, a metal cowling. Most of the fuselage is metal, but it is really a product of its time in 1937. Now, the airplane would go into production from 1940, Greg, to 1969, if you can believe that. Now, ERCO went on to give you an idea of how popular this airplane became. At the end of 1946, at the end of the war, they produced about 4,300 of these airplanes. They were producing this airplane at a rate of 34 per day, Greg. If you can believe that, that's a lot of airplanes. But what happened? We talked about it with the Beaver. Right after the war, aircraft production collapsed, and what happened with ERCO is eventually they just stopped building the airplane. They actually had a problem where one of the test airplanes crashed. They had a shutdown at the factory. They had a lot of problems. Eventually, the design was sold. It went through a number of owners. Sanders owned it at one time, and Mooney ended up with it at one time. So it would continue to be built, but the bulk of the production of almost 6,000 were built right after the war under ERCO. Now, the aircraft does have a military history. Can you believe that, Greg? Look at this airplane and tell me that this is the mighty Ercoupe, that you would be concerned about getting attacked by this airplane. Well, there were a couple of military uses for this. The aircraft was tested by the Army Air Corps as the YO-55, and it was tested as a target to pull targets, if you can believe that, or a target ship. They found that it was not suitable for that role, but it was used by, and we talked about this last week, Greg, the civilian pilot training program. Remember, 80% of the pilots either flew a Piper or another different type of aircraft, and also those numbers, as I said in the last episode we did on this, 400 and some thousand people went through that program. It was a huge number. Many of them flew this aircraft as well as the Piper. Now, the airplane was tested as the YO-55. It didn't work there, but Greg, it had another life. It had another life. It was used for rocket-assisted takeoffs and to test those. Now, this particular aircraft actually has two, what I would say, rocket motor kill marks, two rocket launches on the side of the airplane. I will venture a guess that this airplane did not do that, but I will leave that open for interpretation. It does show two JATO launches. The aircraft were pretty badly torn up in the JATO tests. Now, interesting thing about JATO tests, Greg, right here in Southern California, they were tested at March Field. If you can believe that. That would be something to pay money. Greg, I would pay money if you were in this airplane and we launched you with a rocket propellant. I would pay for that. I get the lawn chair out and talk about that. But they actually tested these aircraft out there and in other places. Now, you got to remember, and Greg can throw some of this stuff up, what was rocket-assisted takeoff and why was it important? Basically, and we're going to go back, I always talk about familiar suspects, the Germans, right? The Germans did a ton of work and actually operational work on rocket-assisted takeoffs. Now, why did they do that? Because they had aircraft that they were overloaded and they needed, remember, you had only so much horsepower that the power plants could give at the time, and in many cases they were overloaded with bombs. What else were in those airplanes, Greg? There were people, there was oxygen, life support, there may be bomb load or cargo, and the idea behind this was it would give you enough oomph to get off the ground. By the way, I've told you before, Greg, oomph is a technical term. Look it up, oomph. But it would give you enough oomph to get up to speed, to get the airplane airborne, and then the power plant on the airplane could kind of take it from there. They are still used in C-130s and in some aircraft launches around the world and transports, heavy lift, cargo airplanes. Now, probably the most prominent one, and I don't know, Greg, if they still do it in their show, is the Blue Angels. C-130 does the jet assisted, rocket assisted takeoff. That's always really cool, but that's the idea. But the Germans really, with the airplane that they started with, was the Gagant.
A Junkers 90, one of the few big four-engine planes the Germans possessed, was used to drag the Gagant along the runway. Then, with the takeoff rockets going full blast, and the Junkers 90 flat out, the enormous glider was airborne for the first time.
That big, heavy lift airplane that they actually got operational but got shot to pieces during the war. It was essentially a flying target practice if it ran into Allied fighters. But it was those types of airplanes. They used it on some of their bombers as well, and Greg can find some of the video and throw that up. Now, with the 310, the 310 was such a significant engineering design airplane that it was donated to what institution? It was donated to the Smithsonian Institution. So if you think about the fact that the linkage, the control linkage on this airplane and the way it was designed was so significant that this little airplane, which you would never imagine that, I always get people that question this airplane in the collection, and I have to remind them about the significant engineering achievements in this airplane. It was actually, that prototype was actually donated to the Smithsonian Institution. Now, what they did with it, I haven't been to Hazy in a while. I don't know if the venerable Ercoupe is parked next to the Enola Gay or somewhere in the facility, but it was donated to the Smithsonian Institution. So with that, I am going to go to my stage 2. Now, Greg, I had to intervene a little bit with Greg. I have to. I cannot mislead you here. I intervened in that the stuff that Greg gave me the last 2 weeks was just vile. So I have intervened. We are back from, what was that, Lens Fixin? Whatever his name was. I've forgotten it because it was so terrible. To Melba's Fixins. Now, Melba this week, and by the way, Melba's Fixins is not a sponsor of the program. Melba's Fixins is got key lime pie today, but we're going to give a shot to key lime pie as opposed to yam soda and some of the other things that Greg was feeding me the last couple of weeks. We're going to take that off. Who I'm going to salute here today is, we take for granted, you get on an airplane and you go flying, but I want to salute Fred Weick, because without guys like that came up, that simplified these airplanes, we have to remember that with these aircraft, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so, Fred and your family, if you're seeing this, we owe you a debt of gratitude, and all the folks over at Engineering and Research Corporation for what you did. So I'm going to take a sip here. As that fine aviation product gets closer, and maybe drowns out my mic. Greg, this is not bad. It's got way too much sugar in it, and I will be lectured over that. But I'm going to take one more. Fred and all those engineers, God bless you. So, as a Warbird, the Army tested this aircraft. It was flown by the Civilian Pilot Training Program. It was also used by the Civil Air Patrol to attack German submarines. It actually carried depth charges, if you can believe that. Right? That's kind of cool. If you think about that. I don't know that it ever actually sunk a German submarine, but it was used by the Civil Air Patrol. It was used in those rocket assist takeoffs and landings. Now, this particular aircraft we have had in the collection probably for about 7 years. It was donated by Len Moore and his family. This was a complete frame-off restoration. The airplane was completely torn down. It is probably one of the nicer Ercoupes in the country. Greg can get a walk around and a shot of it, but we are very proud of it. It is in some unique markings in that there is a stealth bomber on the fuselage, which Greg can get, which is Area 49. I guess that's where the attack version of the Ercoupe resides, and it has the pre-war, which is very interesting, pre-war, early war Army Air Corps marking. So it's actually it's almost in a trainer livery, but it is not. I don't know of any Ercoupes. First of all, there is no Area 49. And I don't know of any Ercoupes that were in these colors, but they may have been. This clearly, if one was being tested by the Army Air Corps, could have been in this livery. It fits the time frame. And again, I cannot attest to the two rocket-assisted takeoffs, but it could have done those. The history on these, a lot of these, when they were torn down and they went off to pasture, this one was actually restored and brought back by Len and his crew. The actual history on the airplane is a little muddy, but it is a very nice and important, valuable aircraft in our collection. Now, I'm going to go to my gratuitous product placement, Greg. Today is Moments in Aviation History. Now, the interesting thing about this book is that actually I wonder, and I haven't been through this, Greg, whether or not this, there's an Ercoupe in here. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. You have to get the book and find out. But if you're looking for that great Christmas gift to excite that young person in the graphics in this, and it's written at a younger person's level, so you get somebody excited about it. Now, the other thing about this book, Greg, if you're a book collector, as I am, it's actually signed by the author. So that is pretty cool. So you go out to our website and get the Moments in Aviation History, and get one of those young people really excited about this, about all things that are in aviation. Now I'm going to put that down and not knock it over. I did pretty good there. But this is the overview on the Ercoupe, a unique airplane, a Warbird in the very niche. What would you say, Greg? The niche of history? It came and went. These aircraft are still fairly common. I have seen a few of them actually, guys that actually fly around and do videos and travelogues with them. And it's actually kind of fun to watch them. At 75 miles an hour, I guess you could go as the crow flies, right? Straight line from A to B. But this is not necessarily an airplane that you're going to jet off to London in. You're going to have to plan for a lot of gas and stuff like that. Now, the other thing about this airplane is that I'm going to wrap up on this. This thing has all these little interesting tidbits. Is this aircraft was certified by the Civil Aeronautic Administration not to spin, if you can believe that. And that was a testament to good old Fred's work. So when you get out, when you get out to the museum, check out this airplane. This is a unique aircraft in the history of aviation, and you will be glad you did. My name is Fred Bell. I want to thank you for joining us today. Hit that subscribe button, like us on YouTube, go out to Facebook, like us on Facebook. Remember, we can always use your donations to make these restorations happen. Thank you very much. Have a great day.